So, with all the UAP and NHI news flying around these days, a lot of people are getting somewhat ontologically challenged by the mentions of psionics and consciousness from whistleblowers. These phenomena don't fit into our dominant materialist paradigm, so they must all be woo and totally unscientific, right? Wrong! It turns out that clinging to a materialist theory, in spite of data that disproves it, is what's actually unscientific. So here's a very quick breakdown of how materialism has been dead for 100 years, and what the latest physics theories actually say about reality. Most of us believe the material world/physical space to have the following attributes. It is local, meaning it is a three-dimensional space, where things within this space have a distance between them. It moves forward incrementally through time. It is solid, in that it is made up of solid atomic building blocks, atoms, and their complex interactions build everything else. It encompasses us in that we exist inside the material world and are built from its components, atoms. It is the fundamental basis of reality and encompasses everything. There is nothing outside it or beyond it. This viewpoint is based on the philosophy of materialism, which was developed in the couple of centuries leading up to the 20th century. Scientifically speaking, it is based on the 5 key principles of strong objectivity: causal determinism, locality, material monism, and epiphenomenalism. I could do a whole talk on these alone, but let's just take them as a given. The thing is that over 100 years ago, just as materialism was at its zenith, all of these principles were disproven by the discovery of quantum mechanics. Materialism is still a useful model for lots of science and engineering, which is why it persists as a dominant philosophy in society, even though much of the scientific fields engaged in cutting-edge physics have moved on to explore a much more foundational physics. So materialism is dead and has been for over 100 years, yet few people realize it. Want more detail on this disproof of materialism? Then go read the works of Dr. Amit Goswami, a theoretical nuclear physicist who explains this eloquently for the lay reader in his book, The Self-Aware Universe. So what is reality then? It turns out that the material world has the following attributes. It is a set of many probabilities in which an observer's act of observation collapses a probability to be solid reality within the perception of the observer. It is only a subset of a larger reality because observers are the causal agent that co-creates the material world, and as such are external to the material world. Therefore, there is at least one other external world encompassing both. It is apparently constrained by a set of rules that governs how observers collapse probabilities, which is consistent across multiple observers. Usually we call these the laws of physics. This may not be inherent to the material world, but to the type of observer we are. Observers exist in a non-local space, a space in which there is no physical distance or dimensions between components in that world, although there may be other factors which govern how close observers are to other observers. Observers converse with each other and in so doing co-create a shared virtual space. This space or material world is a conversation, an exchange of ideas, between a set of observers. The conversation is bound by a set of rules enforced by the observers. In the conversation or virtual space we call the material world, we call the rules the laws of physics. The rules are not inherent to the space, but inherent to the type of observer we are, or the type of conversation we are holding. They observe by reducing the possibly infinite volume of information into a subset of information they are capable of processing. Note that the material world is not a simulation. The observers are not NPCs within it. They are external, using the material world as a communication medium. It is real, in that our experiences, our conversations are real. There are multiple groupings of observers conversing with each other with different sets of rules in different spaces. This creates different universes with different laws of physics. Observers like us collapse probabilities to create fixed perceptions and process input linearly in a single thread, creating a perception of time. This probably includes humans, animals, and other aliens that are similar. It may be that everything we perceive in the physical universe, from atoms to objects like rocks, to concepts like the weather, are manifestations or avatars of a different type of observer. There are observers that have more awareness or creative control of physical space. Observers that operate with a different perception of time. observers that are so far removed from us we cannot even conceive of them. Some of these stranger observers may also interact in our physical world, may join our conversation, and account for what we may have called supernatural beings. This new model makes things considered impossible with materialism to be very reasonable conjectures, giving support to anecdotal evidence for telepathy and other so-called paranormal phenomena. Observers can communicate instantaneously with other observers regardless of distance in the virtual physical space, and co-create other spaces with other observers, although not all observers understand that they can do this, or are even aware that they exist outside of physical or other spaces. Birth seems to be the mapping of an observer into a manifestation or avatar in a physical space. The observer exists prior to and after this mapping. Birth and death are effectively an observer entering and leaving a collective conversation. So what survives the end of a conversation, or what we call death? What are the properties of an observer that stays with it, or is accessible by it, from conversation to conversation? And what is just a transient property of the conversation the observer creates? In other words, what elements of memory and sense of self are part of the non-physical observer state, and what are functions of the brain? The answer is unknown. It's likely there are properties on both sides. For instance, some anecdotal evidence indicates some memories survive death, but ego doesn't. The future of foundational physics is the exploration of this space beyond the material world and the rules that govern it. Perhaps the future of engineering, or psychology, or psionics, based on any new physics in this area, might be evolving the type of observer that we are, to make physical reality less constrained and become more interactive with the non-local space beyond it. For now, I recommend looking up the Wolfram Physics Project and the works of Donald Hoffman. The Theories of Everything podcast on these areas is a good place to start.